Hello and welcome to our latest and greatest episode of Better Together Arizona. I'm Angela Hughey. I'm your host. So proud to be here with my dear friend and partner in so many things, Michael Soto, the president of Equality Arizona. How are you?
I'm so good, my friend. How are you today?
Good. It's good to see you. I know we've had so many discussions since the election has been decided, and I'm just grateful for you to spend some time with us today, really talking about what we think the election outcome, how it's going to really impact LGBTQ plus Arizonans and LGBTQ Americans. I want to start with this NBC exit poll that I saw that said that 86% of the LGBTQ community voted for Vice President Harris in the general election. That's a huge jump, right? So clearly we see where LGBTQ plus Americans are on the political spectrum, but obviously things did not work out the way many LGBTQ Arizonans and Americans voted.
Right. I think we see that jump in particular because in the first Trump administration, while he was not able to, and his administration wasn't able to pass an enormous amount of codified law, they did execute through executive order, through administrative rule changes, through guidance letters, all those sorts of things, changes that negatively impacted the LGBTQ community.
Right.
And that was from adults to youth, right? That was kind of the whole gamut of LGBTQ people, from transgender military service and banning trans Americans from serving in the military.
Like a removal of sexual orientation and gender identity on federal websites.
Right. All of that. Right. And so just seeing this, I think LGBTQ Americans know that what we can expect in the second Trump term is a continuation of that agenda, in part because he's promised it, right? In part because the people that he's bringing into his cabinet and to his administration, that's a core part of their goal, is actually to do everything that they can to limit the legal protections and rights extended to LGBTQ Americans as a part of full citizenship. Not special rights, but full citizenship.
Not special rights, equal rights.
Exactly.
And then let's talk about this extreme anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric this cycle, right? Like, how does that negative politicization impact our community, right? And I mean, my concern in particular is for our most vulnerable members of the LGBTQ plus community. I worry so much about the transgender community and our LGBTQ plus youth. It also seems like we're going to see more of this rhetoric and more of this politicization, right?
We are. I mean, that was a core part of his playbook, right? And of his team's playbook, was to separate vulnerable communities and marginalized communities even more, and say they're to blame for your woes and we're not for them, we're for you.
Right. There's a bunch of othering going on.
Absolutely.
We're blaming it on the, she's for they, them, Trump's for you,
for
right?
You, exactly.
So based on just how politicized the LGBTQ community was and the anti-LGBTQ, in particular the anti-transgender rhetoric, what do we expect to see really, I think, it is kind of his first order of business, right? I mean, my guess is that we're going to see a flurry of executive orders. I think obviously a transgender military ban is absolutely happening.
Yes. Changes to rules in terms of anything that he can change in terms of education, changes to Medicare and Medicaid.
So can he do that through executive order?
He can do some of it through executive order, right? So he will do the fullest extent to the law of that he can change through executive order, through rule changes, and through guidance letters, which Obama and Biden also used, right, to create more access to equality for LGBTQ people. I think part of what the Trump administration learned from last time is that they essentially used those same mechanisms to undo things the Obama era had done that made equality more accessible for LGBTQ people. Then they saw Biden undo those things, and this time they want to make codified law. So they're going to do those again through administrative action, but then they're going to do everything they can to pass law so that it can't be as easily undone.
So, and I want to talk about, again, this executive order, and then the importance of codifying things. In this case, we don't want to see the codification.
Right.
I think really want to drill down into like each administration's ability to interpret current law, right, and current Supreme Court rulings differently, and to use them their interpretations in the ways that they see fit. I remember being on the 2010 Census Subcommittee,
right,
and the short form of the census had been created under the Bush administration.
Right.
And under the Bush administration, their interpretation of the Defense of Marriage Act was that same-sex couples could not be counted as married couples because we did not have federal marriage protections.
Right.
The Obama administration comes in after the census form has been completed, and they administer the census form, and their interpretation of the same piece, which is the Defense of Marriage Act, is, well, there are states that have legislatively ruled, where there have been district court rulings that allows for same-sex marriage, and so because of that, we believe that same-sex couples that are living in the same household can be counted.
Right.
Talk about like
just that huge leeway.
It's such a huge leap, because I just don't think people like really understand like that there's rulings, there's interpretations, right? That the Biden administration has used interpretations to give more protections to LGBTQ plus Arizonans and Americans, but how easily rolled back that is.
So easily, because the law is open to interpretation. You and I know this, having written laws, right? Having been a part of that process with our legal teams, actually trying to codify protections into law. Even doing that, there's still so much interpretation, because the law doesn't say in simple, plain language, this will happen and these are the people that are protected. It uses really complicated language, right, and fits it into very complicated legal code that requires entire professions to interpret, right? And so a good example, so you already mentioned the first, first 100 days, we're going to see a bunch of executive orders and a bunch of rule changes and such on many different topics, including LGBTQ equality, trans military ban, Medicare, Medicaid, but we're also going to see them chipping away at the Bostock ruling. So the Bostock ruling, right, Supreme Court ruling that says that all people are protected under the basis of sex, right?
Under the current civil rights rule, right? Like the way I see it is and it was Neil Gorsuch that wrote the opinion, who was a Trump appointee, right?
Yes.
And I think that's important to point out. So the way I interpret the ruling is that the Supreme Court said that sex was essentially an umbrella term, right? And that discrimination against sex is unlawful based on current civil rights law, and that is inclusive of a person's sexual orientation and gender identity.
Exactly. And then the Biden administration used their ability to interpret law, right, as the executive branch of our government, to then write guidance letters, to create rules, right, to create all these administrative mechanisms to advance Justice Gorsuch's interpretation of the Bostock ruling.
Beyond employment, right?
Beyond employment, and in ways that in states like ours, where we don't have a state law, where then, we were able to say, well, we're covered under federal law, right? And so employers should understand this. Our governor, right, agrees with that. It just opens up all of these avenues for protection if you interpret it that way. But
if you interpret it differently.
Exactly. And the Trump administration, here's the thing, there are a lot of very smart people in the world. I include you and I in them, but we are not the only smart people in the world, and not every smart person wants to do the work that we want to do, right? Our opposition also has, unfortunately, very smart people, and they have been working for years on how to craft these arguments to say, actually, Bostock is a very narrow example. It should not be interpreted. It should not be interpreted widely. It should not apply to
to this case or this case housing, or
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And
so So if you think so, it makes sense, and I think it's in the Trump 47 plan, right?
Right.
That they want to
Yes.
interpret Bostock differently.
Yes.
So that would mean a narrowing, obviously, of the interpretation to bring it down just to employment.
Right.
But then I feel like there's concerns that there will be like a religious right of refusal or a right to discriminate
Absolutely.
in employment as well.
Right. I think that's very much, I mean, we should be watching all of this, right? Because again, there are people that have been, since the Bostock ruling came down,
Right.
trying to find legal arguments and avenues to limit and narrow that decision instead of to allow it to exist as it stands today, where it provides an incredible amount of protection, similar to a Obergefell, right?
Right.
To LGBTQ Americans. And so that's, we're going to.
And I'm glad you bring up Obergefell.
Yes.
So I do want to say one thing about Bostock, that ruling is for employers that have 15 or more employees,
It
right?
is,
Which
because
is
of
one
federal
of the
protections.
reasons that we have continued to work very diligently to ensure that there are municipal ordinances in states like Arizona,
Exactly.
because we can bring that employment number down to ensure more people in employment are covered, not just based on their sexual orientation or gender identity, but based on age and disability and race and culture and everything,
yes,
right?
All
that
protected classes.
Yep.
Yes.
And religion.
And that's actually work that can be done at the municipal level and at the state level, where even states that have existing non-discrimination protections, they can bring that number down from 15 to a much lower
floor,
number.
It is not the ceiling.
Exactly.
Got
exactly. Like, we can do better. Every worker, every employee in this country, every person should be covered by civil rights laws.
Okay, so that's Bostock.
Yes.
And you just mentioned Obergefell,
Yes.
right? Which brings marriage equality to all 50 states for
Yes.
same-sex couples,
Exactly.
right? Federal protections,
Yep.
1,138 rights and protections.
That's right.
A reminder that marriage is a civil contract between two people, right?
Right.
And that's why all those federal protections kick in.
Exactly.
We worked really closely together with our Equality and Fairness Coalition and campaign, and with LGBTQ plus leaders throughout the nation to really encourage the passing of the Respect for Marriage Act.
We did. We worked extremely hard on it and played a critical role in passage of that law. The first federal non-discrimination rights
it's the first
signed into law
ever codified by any president of the United States.
Exactly.
So I really want to talk about Obergefell because we were in a meeting with our multicultural advisory board, and folks brought up that same-sex couples were concerned that their marriage and their protections could be rolled back.
Absolutely,
right?
They should be concerned. Yes,
should be concerned, or is it right for me to say that because the Respect for Marriage Act is in place, right? This would be a pretty tall order. Like the Trump administration could go after Obergefell.
Absolutely.
There could be a new ruling, just as there was with Roe v. Wade, right? Where you can see the argument now that this becomes a states' rights issue.
100%.
Right?
Yep.
But what the Respect for Marriage Act essentially says is that as long as marriage equality is legal in one state in the nation, then those federal rights and protections stay in place in all states, no matter where you reside, right?
Right. That if you're married, that has to be recognized by the state, right? So, like, if we go back to a pre-Obergefell time when, a state like Arizona did not have a codified law, right?
And still doesn't.
And still doesn't. And in fact, it's defined in our state constitution that marriage is between a man and a woman, right? Just like it was in many states during the Defense of Marriage time. If you got married in California or Iowa or Massachusetts, your marriage had to be recognized here, right? Like, you would have to be recognized here because of the Respect for Marriage Act. And so our work essentially ensures that as long as there's one state in the union that is marrying LGBTQ people and you get married there, that every state in the union has to recognize and preserve those federal rights, right? Those rights of marriage.
So it's state protections. And again, I think this is really important for folks that really have nervousness, those federal rights and protections as well.
Right. And so important. And also, by the way, it's for interracial marriage too. It's for same-sex marriage and interracial marriage, because we have had many laws in states in this country that did not want people of different races marrying as well. And so the Respect for Marriage Act covers both of those cases. And so that we did the hard work, right? And amazing people like Senator Sinema, right, did the hard work of creating codified law. And so I'm sure, much to the Trump administration's chagrin, they will not be able to just do an executive order, right, that chips away at that. They have to go through the congressional process, the legislative process, if they want to change that law, which they're not going to be able to. They don't have the votes to do
Right. But it would be am I correct in believing this would be two-part? First, they would have to get Obergefell overturned. Is that correct? And then they would try and overturn the Respect for Marriage Act.
So I think they could do it probably
either or.
Yeah,
there's a combination of ways they could do it.
They'd have to do both, essentially, right? But they could do it kind of simultaneously, right? They could do it in sort of different iterations. But they would have to do both at this point, both repeal codified law or change that law to be more in line with their beliefs, more defense of marriage, not respect for marriage, right? And go after Obergefell through the judiciary. So that's a long process, right? So this is not like LGBTQ marriages are not going to be nullified on day one. It's not possible, right?
Well, but talk about that process, because it seems to me that the Trump administration can issue a number of executive orders.
Absolutely.
And then organizations that have deep legal teams then file lawsuits and, kind of muck up the system, right?
Exactly.
A lot of what we're going to see, in particular, I think in the first year or two, is an attempt to roll back rights.
Absolutely.
And then lawsuits.
Yes.
And then that process taking place, which we know is not necessarily the quickest
It's
process.
not fast, exactly. And even for passage of laws, right? Let's say Congress decided a top priority is to repeal respect for marriage or to change it in some way more in line with their views. Even if it got through that process in, say, 8 months, which would be very fast, by the way, in Congress, that would be like lightning speed. Congress is meant to be a very slow moving mechanism for government, purposefully, exactly, because changing laws and making law is a very serious matter and should be done with deliberation, not with lightning speed, right? So let's say 8 months into the first term, they're able to change Respect for Marriage Act, or by the end of the first year, right, they're able to repeal it or change it. Then all sorts of organizations all over the country are going to kick into high gear and sue the government. And they're going to say that is a misinterpretation of the law. They'll cite Obergefell, right? They'll cite like other court cases and other laws that support like the 22 states that have non-discrimination laws.
Absolutely.
And, all the states that have marriage, same-sex marriage as a part of their
I know, like
law.
Legislatively, I think it was California, Hawaii, and I want to say, I can't remember the other state, Maine, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly.
That made sure that they passed marriage equality laws legislatively.
Yes.
It seemed to me like it was a very proactive defense.
Absolutely.
Should this administration come to bear,
exactly.
Understanding that they may be taking a look at or attempting to roll back marriage equality.
Exactly. And so you will have organizations and groups of people and states suing the federal government, and then those laws typically are then not usually a appellate justice or at some level, can be different levels of the court. So the judiciary will basically say, hey, we're going to stay this law. We're not going to allow this law to go into effect until we get through this legal process, right?
Right. So there's like a stay.
Exactly. So then the law doesn't go into effect. So then marriages are fine still, and that would likely last all the way until it got to the Supreme Court, which this Supreme Court, I don't want them deciding on marriage equality. I really don't. And so I hope none of this happens.
Yeah.
And I truly do not think we had enough support in Congress.
There were in the final vote, I believe there were 10 Republican U.S. senators that signed on. 11.
Yeah, I think it was 11.
Even better.
Yep.
11 Republican U.S. senators that signed on to the Respect for Marriage Act.
Exactly.
Right?
And what was it, 14 that allowed the cloture vote to happen. And we've got enough support in Congress still, and same-sex marriage, LGBTQ families are not seen in the way that they were seen even in 2015, right? Like everyone in this country knows a gay couple or a gay family that they love and adore and are like, oh, you're the coolest families. Like, you're wonderful people, right? Like, this is not a popular neighbors. We're great neighbors. Like, this is not an issue. Like, this isn't a Prop 8 issue where people are like, oh, that's gonna, kill the family and redefine marriage in terrifying ways, we know now that actually we're really great at being families and married people and actually make those things look really good. And so and are an example of
and I
how
think, like,
beneficial it is.
yes, and also
Yes.
from a healthy family standpoint, I
Yes.
just, I mean, Sherry and I have been together for over 30 years. We've been
Exactly.
married for 16 of those years, I
Yeah.
think. I remember getting married in California and having this marriage certificate that had no legal meaning, right?
Right.
And it's been really interesting to watch this piece of paper gain legal status, right?
Yes.
But the importance of those 1,138 rights and protections for
Yeah.
for all families,
All
right?
families.
Having had a health journey
Yeah.
in 2023,
Yeah.
knowing that my wife was always present, that she was in
Exactly.
a position, should she need to be, to make
Yeah.
healthcare decisions
Exactly.
for us and for our family,
Exactly.
really was super important and allowed me to concentrate on just getting better.
Exactly,
Right?
because your family is protected. And the thing is, like, we always knew that LGBTQ people would just be families that were the same as any other family, just living daily life.
Yeah.
But there were lots of myths out there. And now, though, Americans know that those myths aren't true. They're lies, because LGBT
Well, we're
families,
almost a decade into marriage equality now.
Exactly.
And the sky did not fall.
It didn't. And we've got an entire generation of, actually several generations now, of kids that have had LGBT parents.
Yeah.
They've gone through schools, right? Their friends know that their parents are two dads or two moms, or,
Right.
and nothing bad happened. It was just, oh, these are great kids with great parents, right? Like,
We're just a more diverse family.
we're just a more diverse family. We look slightly different than maybe heterosexual families, but honestly, our lives are pretty similar. And so
Definitely.
I think because of that, because of just the public knowledge that same-sex marriage did not cause the downfall of Western civilization, right? It was like, oh, wait, yeah, that's all silly myth making, right? And scare tactics. Anything that the Trump administration does around LGBTQ marriage and trying to take those rights away from our community is going to be pretty unpopular, because, again,
Yeah,
everybody knows someone.
I think I really think the employment piece would be
huge.
very, very unpopular too.
Absolutely.
I mean, LGBTQ people are members of every team, right?
Yes.
And we're top talent.
Yeah.
And what really matters, I think, to employers is attracting and retaining the best and the brightest.
Exactly. I think similar thing for the military ban, even for trans people, right? Like that. So in an era when you didn't see gay and trans soldiers, right? When you didn't see service members and families that were LGBTQ, it was easy to say, well, they don't exist, and it would be bad if they existed in the military. And now it's like, oh, wait, there are gay and lesbian and trans and bisexual soldiers and their families, and they're just a part of our big, huge service member family.
Well,
They're
and
just
again,
as
I think
valued
it
as
really
anyone
is about
else.
attracting and retaining the
Top
best
talent.
and
Yes.
best and brightest.
Yes.
And like, these are people that sign up to ensure America's freedom.
Exactly. And they put their lives on the line.
Yeah.
And we know that trans people are serving in the military right now. Trans people serve typically at a much higher per capita rate than cisgender people. They are valued members of their platoons and their squadrons, and valued members of the branches of service that they serve in. And we already have a shortage of people signing up for military service. So now you're going to take some of the best and brightest and say, oh, it has nothing to do with how you do your job, by the way. You're great at your job, but because you're out as a transgender person, now you're out of the military.
Yeah, it makes no
ridiculous.
sense to me, again,
Exactly.
from wanting to have the best and brightest,
Exactly.
and making sure that you're like fully staffed,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Whether it's in a military instance,
Right.
or from an employment instance,
Either way.
what matters is the skill set that the team member brings to the table to ensure that you are that we are moving whatever the objectives are forward.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I don't get it.
It
I don't
makes no
understand it.
sense.
And with the conversation around our immigrant community in any
Right.
way, shape, or form, why would we want to educate, highly talented DACA kids that came here under no fault of their own?
Exactly.
They've been educated in America. It is the only country that they have known.
Yeah.
And they're some of the best and brightest and most talented folks.
Absolutely.
And we have a talent shortage.
We
again,
do.
right?
We do.
I don't understand it.
I don't either. I mean, we know Reina and Jose, right? We
Right.
know some of the most talented people in the world that fit into that category. And And in what world is our country a better place if we lose this amazing young couple who are changing the world, right? Who are doing
They
incredible
just make
things.
Arizona better.
They
really
do. They make Arizona and our nation better. And to lose them would be a loss for us, right? And the same is true when it comes to trans people in the military or LGBT people in the workplace. Like, to lose us because of discrimination and hate, that's a loss, not just for us. Like, we may lose a job temporarily. We're going to move on. We're very talented people. We'll go find other jobs.
Right.
But that workplace,
No,
the military,
it's a
right?
loss to
It's a
the
loss.
fabric of who
Yes,
of our
fabric of
state
society.
and of our nation. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think it's an important conversation that we need to dig deeper into and
We have
keep
to.
having.
We have to.
Okay, so we understand that we think that there's going to be a number of executive orders. We
Yes.
see that Medicare and Medicaid rollback happening
Right.
for transgender Americans.
Yep.
So unfortunate.
It's awful. Yeah.
We need. It seems to me like if we are in a position, should have conversations with healthcare companies to
100%.
encourage them to make sure that they have transgender inclusive healthcare
Yes.
policies in place.
Exactly.
Right. Like I think it's really important right now as folks are trying to grapple with this is it feels like all of these things are coming at us. Right.
They are.
And what are the decisions and actions that we can take to help ensure that we keep as much in place, or we find alternative ways
Yes.
to make sure that transgender Arizonans and Americans have health care.
Absolutely.
So having conversations, it seems like, with healthcare companies about making sure that they have inclusive policy in place.
Yes.
Certainly seems like something we need to be
I
talking
think
about.
top priority, right, is making sure that, and one here, I think this is where the LGBTQ movement in general can learn from your work, and the incredible relationships that you have with the business community, and the way that by sitting down and having a cup of coffee, you can literally explain to people who are making these decisions whether we continue to offer this kind of insurance or not, right, or whatever those big decisions are, to continue to offer that kind of insurance and make it more affordable, right? And then it's our job as the LGBTQ community, and yes, this is not ideal, but we're gonna have to get creative as a community, and so
we have to pivot, right?
We do. And so if those, right, depending on the executive orders and things that are signed and the administrative actions that are changed, so maybe we need to really truly sit down and say, okay, it's time to have an AARP style insurance cooperative, right, for LGBTQ Americans, specifically trans Americans, that we can offer and buy into, and ensure that if public insurance is, closed off for trans people, that we have private insurance that's affordable, that trans people can purchase, right?
What a great
there's
potential
always
solution.
a pivot. There's always a solution. We're just going to have to get creative and make sure that our people are safe to the greatest extent possible.
Right.
And yes, that is taking, for like, you and I don't do that right now, right? Nobody does that right now, but maybe we need to, right?
These are the conversations that perhaps we need to have.
Exactly. And like, just because one, avenue closes for a brief time, it's only 4 years, right? Like, it's not going to be a fun 4 years. I'm not saying that, but we can pivot, we can survive, and we can maybe find some creative opportunities to actually even better protect our community.
Right.
Right.
Well,
And like
more
you
choices
said, more choices.
is better protection.
Yes.
No matter who you are, no matter how you
Yes.
identify or who you love.
Exactly. And continuing to build those relationships with private insurers and saying, hey, we are a market just like anybody else, right? We're an underserved market. Serve this market and you will benefit, as will we, right?
I love your creativity and leaning into this. And again, just saying that, like, we all have to really work in a collaborative way to find, solutions to bring the most protections to our LGBTQ plus community, both here in Arizona and throughout the nation. Okay.
Exactly.
This is good. Like, I feel like we're coming up with ways that we can all work together and collaboratively to encourage that we have a response to the concerns we have around healthcare in particular. So I want to go back to the Supreme Court for a minute because they are going to hear a really big court case. It's the United States versus Skrmetti, right?
Mm-hmm.
And is that they're hearing that in December?
They are December 4th. This is a challenge brought by the ACLU to the Tennessee ban for transgender medical care.
Okay.
And so this is a huge case. It will be heard on the 4th, so it won't be decided that day. So I always need to remind people the Supreme Court has a cycle, right?
It'll be
And
decided
so-
in June of next year,
exactly,
right?
exactly. So it's
Which
gonna,
is Pride Month. It would be great if it was a good decision, although it
Let's
does not always
hope.
happen that way.
Yeah, exactly. Let's very much hope for a good decision. I think everyone should pay attention to the arguments. That you can listen to them live. You can also read them, so you can hear the legal presentations from both sides, and you can hear the questions that the justices ask of those lawyers, which can be very interesting, right?
And kind of telling on where we think
sometimes it
sometimes
can
you
be.
can be like, oh, we think that they're leaning this way.
Exactly. You can kind of you can at least get a sense for the headspace that each of the justices are in, because pretty much every justice will ask at least one question. Okay.
So the ACLU has brought this case. This is a case in an attempt to overturn the Tennessee.
Right. And to say it's unconstitutional based on the Equal Protection Clause.
Okay. And the ban, which has not taken place yet. Is that correct?
I believe so. Good question.
We don't think it has.
I don't think it has.
So again, I think this is good. This is like really good for folks from a civic standpoint. This is a law that was put into place, and then there was an immediate legal challenge. And we believe that it is on hold as it works its way through the legal challenge.
It might have been lifted at an appellate court level at some case, but it's gone back and forth. And so sometimes you see that in the you get one justice saying, we're going to put a hold on this law. We're going to stay the law.
Someone else says,
no, it's fine to let it go next. We've had the same thing happen with immigration laws here in Arizona, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, well, nope, that law's not going into effect. Oh, part of that law can go into effect, right? So, yeah. Absolutely.
Right. Okay, so this case, the intent by the ACLU in litigating this case is they would like to see this Tennessee piece of legislation overturned.
Right.
And this is a ban. Can we talk about it's a ban around hormone replacement therapy?
Right.
And
surgery,
puberty blockers.
Right.
And this is specific to people under the age of 18.
Yes. Yeah. So it's a youth ban for basically transitioning for medical care, gender affirming care, or as is a much more accurate term, just medical care, medical care for
transgender
people,
medical care.
Right. Necessary medical care.
Right.
So that, that medical care keeps me alive and healthy at this point, right? And has for over 26 years. So it's important medical care. Just like every human being, I have an endocrine system, and need a healthcare that provides a healthy endocrine system. And that includes testosterone for all human beings, by the way. We all have estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, all those things, just in different amounts. And so I have a larger amount of testosterone that makes me a healthy human being now. And so, yeah.
Okay. So, and I don't want to talk in hypotheticals, but I do want to say that this is a really important case.
It is.
And however the Supreme Court rules likely goes beyond Tennessee, and will have an impact, I think, throughout the United States when it comes to medical care for transgender minors.
It will, and in part because we've seen these medical bans proliferate throughout many states at this point. So it will have an impact on every other state, no matter what or most other states, no matter what the decision is. And the states that have not passed these kinds of bans, some of them have passed the opposite kinds of laws, right? Sort of a right to healthcare. So this is going to impact a whole lot of different states, pretty much every state in the union. And so it's going to impact pretty much every trans person in the union. This particular law is about youth healthcare, but depending on how wide or big their interpretation is, this could have some sort of door that opens into adults
healthcare, as well,
right? Which is a big hurdle, and should be, because adults should be able to make whatever decision we need to make in our lives, and our healthcare is our business and our doctor's business, not anybody else's. But we've seen the Supreme Court make decisions about people's healthcare in the past, and so about entire groups like women, say, and so half the population, and so it's not unheard of, right? And so
we need to watch the case closely.
Yes,
and the decision will come out in June of next year.
It will, exactly. So that's something to be aware of. Keep an eye on. I'm sure you and I will do multiple briefings on it for people as we get through.
Sure.
This process.
I mean, obviously,
Yes.
it seems to me collaboration and good communication is really the key to
It is.
walking through this.
Yeah.
I keep telling people that the way I'm seeing the next 4 years is a football game,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we're going to enter into the fourth quarter, or
Love
the
it.
first quarter rather,
Yep.
and we know that this team is big, and we're going to get scraped up and roughed up,
We
and
are.
the important thing that we can do is, I think, play really good defense.
Exactly.
And then look for the bright spots, right?
Yes.
There's always a bright spot.
There's always an opportunity for offense, right?
Yeah,
like
there is.
and whether it's policy or cultural, right? Like we have to go back to understanding the balance between those things, and that we have to bring the American people along if we want to make lasting policy change. And I think with trans people, we're seeing that need even more than ever. Right?
And it reminds me of where we were, a couple decades ago with gay people, where people did not know that they knew someone who was gay.
Exactly.
And it seems to me where we're at with America right now is that people do not know that they happen to know someone who's transgender.
Right.
Which leads me to my final question.
Okay.
The first openly transgender congressperson has been elected. Sarah McBride out of the great state of Delaware.
She's amazing.
She hasn't even come into office yet.
Yeah.
And House Speaker Mike Johnson has issued a bathroom ban.
Yes. And Marjorie Taylor Greene has threatened to even attack her if she is in a women's restroom, which is ugly and awful.
And unlawful.
And should tell us a lot about Representative Greene and who she is as a human. Not that that's news to anyone. But yes, so every Congress gets to set its own rules, right? And so Speaker Johnson has made it clear he's going to be setting this rule that trans people can't use the appropriate bathroom in Congress. So Sarah issued a statement, right, that I think was brilliant, because here's the thing, like our movement, we never win if we are only reactive to people that are trying to dehumanize us, to tell us we are not worth taking up space in this world, right? For people that believe those things, those hateful things about us. And she was absolutely brilliant. She did not allow the speaker and his transphobia, right? And this rule founded in transphobia to be the story of the day, because she just said, I'm here to work for Delawareans. I'm here to do my job as an elected member of Congress. And I'm not here to have a petty fight with you. And so I will abide by the rules of Congress and we'll move on with life. And she's going to make her term not defined by this kind of ridiculous maneuvering that is just meant to grab headlines, that is meant to help to try to.
I think, and it's it begs for reaction, right?
It does, yeah.
And what the incoming congressperson is saying is,
I
was elected by the great people of Delaware to do a job, and that is
for
to bring
them
important solutions to the state of Delaware.
Yes.
And that is my intent. And what next?
Yeah, and she's not going to have these silly culture war arguments that nobody wins, quite frankly, that are just ugly and awful and cause greater division in society. And she just took that away from them, right? She said, I'm not gonna sit here and scream at you in the playground like you're screaming at me.
So she's a thoughtful leader.
Yeah.
And
she's a grown up, and she's showing us how to lead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because she said, this is my job, not fighting with you, sir. And
my job is to represent the great people of Delaware.
Yes. And she did it with dignity and respect. And honestly, that's what's going to win the day, right? Because the headline today, right, is, incredible example of leadership from Sarah McBride. Sarah McBride focused on her constituents. It's nothing about Mr. Johnson, right?
Also, this is not about X or whatever the platform is called now, right?
Yeah.
This actually is, we hire people when we elect them to do a job, which is to represent their constituents.
Absolutely. Which she's doing her job and they're not. And so ultimately that does speak louder, right?
Yeah, it really does. Actions speak louder than words.
They do. And she's there to govern, not to play silly political games.
Yeah.
And
well, much congratulations to her. She's definitely a bright spot.
She's amazing.
In what we kind of looking forward to see is going to be a little bit of a rough and tumble road. Yeah. But I know that if we're all working together, we're going to find the way forward together. Thank you, Michael.
Oh, thank you, my friend. Good to be with you today.
Good to be with you.